All right, everybody, it is 4:30, and in the interest of starting and ending on time, I am going to go ahead and get us started. Tonight, we're going to start off with a couple of different things I wanted to share with you all very quickly. So I'm going to share my screen. Wanted to share with you all very quickly. Several of you have asked, hey, where do I find the video recaps for this? And that's actually a very good question. The video recaps you can get in a couple of different places. Giants does have a YouTube channel. And if you just go to youtube.com/@Giants Network, I believe it is, and I will put that direct link in the chat. You can see that we have some of the smaller videos that I took out of our last one, but you can also click on playlists and you'll see we've got a 5th grade playlist, an 8th grade playlist, we've got a 3rd grade playlist, a 7th grade playlist. So every grade level that we have done these new recaps for, there's a playlist for. So you can just click on the Giants 5th grade playlist and it's there. Another place that you can pick this up is actually on the Giants website. So if I hover over 5th grade and I go to Unit 1 Foundations, you will see now when you go to Unit 1 that the recap video, the whole recap video for the whole evening, is available right underneath the lessons as we go. Same deal for Unit 2 because we rolled out 2 units last time. So the whole video is there. Right now, tonight, we're doing Unit 3. So there is nothing there right now. But if you go back there by the end of this week, there should be something there. The other thing that I wanted to let you guys know that is brand new this year, we are experimenting here. And that's one of the pieces of feedback I'm going to ask for at a later session. But we are experimenting here with, and hopefully I pulled up a good lesson to demonstrate that with. Nope, I did not. But we are experimenting with, I will just let you know, putting in brief recaps of just a specific thing. So you'll see we've got a playlist here called 5th grade Giants mini videos. Oh, goodness. But you can see we took, so like the 5th grade overview, like the overview of the whole year, I took that out and made it its own separate video and embedded that like right at the front and center of the very first lesson of the very first unit. Phil's locating a colony overview, like I pulled that out as its own separate video and we embedded that where it goes in the lesson plan. So going forward, we're going to try doing that this year so that you guys have the ability to, if you have to miss a session, which we hope you never do, but we understand I've got a whole slew that are out for parent-teacher conferences tonight. If you ever have to miss a session, don't worry. You can watch the full video, and then the big stuff that needs explanation will have its own little mini recap pulled directly out of that video now. So that's a brand new thing we're trying this year that we've never tried before. And I'm hopeful it is successful. So to kick us off tonight, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes and I wanted to ask, and you can either unmute or you can drop in the chat. How has it been going so far? We rolled out Units 1 and Unit 2 last time. Some of you are using all of it. Some of you are using parts of it. Whichever camp you fall into, that's totally fine. But does anyone have anything that they have done with their kids, the good, the bad, or the ugly, that they wanted to share with everybody else?
I will.
Oh, go for it, Patty. Go for it.
I'm on Unit 2. I just started the G-Specs with Pacific Northwest. And it went really well. And I love to have the debates with them. I really enjoy that. One thing that I was wondering about is in Unit 1, I believe, or is it the first part of this one? I can't remember, but Phil has that great connections and conditions slideshow. And I'm always wondering, how do I tell children where casino fits? But I always get stuck on that. And then kids will ask me about it. And I'm wondering if it's because the Native Americans now have a lot of the casinos in Michigan or what. I just wondered if Phil could help me out with that, or you could. How do I address that with them when that comes up for conditions and connections?
I'm going to let Phil take that away because he is here. So Phil, take it away. Where does casino fall?
I actually used to have fun in Minnesota. We made the casino we have two of them that were fairly close to Minneapolis, and we made them a field excursion where people would walk through and take down what state the license plate was from and make a map of that. And it was fourth grade at the time. It was, what are the other states that are around us? But rather than just give them a blank map and have them write the state name in, they would go out and they would get some information. And you could just about count on it, with Minneapolis being where it was, kind of the western edge of settlement in the United States. We would have an occasional Washington or Oregon or Montana license plate in the parking lot there. So casino, in fact, just about everything turns out to be very complicated, like a river is. A river is a connection if you've got a boat, but it's a condition if you're looking for drinking water. So a casino is a condition if you're local and you want a job. It's a connection if you've got a license plate that came in from Indiana. And unfortunately, the tribes don't run most of the casinos themselves. So there's a great big connection of money that gets funneled toward Las Vegas or Atlantic City. The people that actually operate the casino take a share out of it.
Thank you.
We had a few things pop up in the chat. Karen Karen mentioned that she's running a little bit behind. Karen, don't worry about that in particular, because that's pretty normal. And we offer a lot of different spots that you can cut stuff if need be. And we try to highlight some of those in the lessons as we go. But as far as where map skills are addressed, kind of all over the place. A lot of the fill activities in particular are going to be really good at building specific map skills. We do a little bit less with things like compass rose and cardinal directions and things like that in the upper grades. Those hit a little bit more in third and fourth grade. But in terms of, and I think Phil's even got a little bit tonight. Phil, is North America regions tonight? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, like when we pull out those clickable maps and things like that, we are really highlighting a couple of map skills with kids, and we do it a little bit at a time. So they're kind of all over the place with that. Mary Sue, she and I talked in person the other day, and Phil, she had just finished, the first time I went in, she had just finished the Where Do We Put Our? When I went in to visit her this time, she had just finished the Ocean Currents activity. And I tried not to take it personally when she told me how much she loves the fill activities, and then was like, yep, and we skipped this one to do something else. And I was like, oh, that one was one of mine. But just kidding, Mary Sue, I'm giving you a hard time. But she very much enjoys the fill stuff in particular. So you have a new fan, Dr. Gershmel. And then I got one privately. I think that was an accident, but I've just finished unit 1 and my students loved it. They wanted to make slideshows to teach other grade levels the different roles of social studies. We had a late start because my district uses something different, and I just lost it. Oh, there it is. And I am doing this and hoping to prove how worthwhile it is. That is awesome to hear, and I love that the kids want to go back and teach others some of the stuff that they've learned. We don't have that built in there, but what a great activity to actually have them do and take down to some others. And then Kelly, I asked my students what other local places might we consider a connection and condition. They said the theater, it might be a reason they consider visiting a place. Now, if they meet people from elsewhere and share ideas and thoughts, then the theater is also a connection. Absolutely. You guys have great insights. Does anybody else have anything that they have taken from the first couple of units that they wanted to talk about?
I would just like to add, I have done that first like slideshow presentation multiple times, like the one that you went over in the last session. And I just felt like after going through it as a group, it went so much better this year than it ever has. So that was fun for me. And I felt like they were way more engaged. So that was a fun bonus. And then just later when we got into the Explorer part, I broke kids up into like 5 groups. And so each group, researched one explorer, and then they did like a presentation on that, and they loved that too. So just a couple, good things that have been going on.
That is also good to hear. And with that Explorers piece, I was just alerted that the videos went down. So half of the videos did not work, and we just replaced those about a week ago. So huge thanks to Becky Bush, who used to be the head of this project before moving on to a different role elsewhere, because she alerted me to the issue. And I said, hey, I'm swamped right now. Do you have anything we can put up there? And within an hour, she had even better videos than we had before up in that document. So perfect.
Nice.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the insight and feedback. Phil and I do listen to this, and we do, when we hear things that go well, we try to do more of that. And when we hear things that don't go quite so well, we try to do less of or correct those things. So appreciate that. And we will always ask you for a little bit of feedback at the start of these meetings. The other piece that I wanted to quickly tackle as we get started here is, let me share just my Safari window. Some people had a couple of questions about OpenBook, and the hard part is that they asked me those questions about 3.5, 4 weeks ago, and I said, yes, we will definitely cover that at the next network. And then I could not remember who it was or what specifically they requested. So I'm just going to do a very, very, very quick flyby here, unless somebody in the room was one of the people who asked it. But to actually download a copy of OpenBook, you're going to click on Get a Copy. And wow, that loaded super fast at my home internet. Yay, go Spectrum. And then you can scroll down to your grade level, which for you guys is 5th grade. And I recommend teachers download the whole book, because then you've got the whole thing on your computer. But individual students, you can take the link for chapter 1, for example, and you can just copy it. And you can go into, I don't have access to a learning management platform, but if you're using Google Classroom or Schoology or anything like that, you can just create an activity in your learning management system, and you can just take this link right out of your web browser and drop it in there, and they will be able to access it. That's again why I say for the student version, do chapter by chapter, because as the year goes on, if you do the whole book with them, they're going to spend the first 5 minutes of class by the time April rolls around scrolling to the end of the book, where you're ideally going to be at that point in time. So very quickly, again, all you really need to do is just copy the link out of your web browser and drop it into whatever you're using, whether that's, I know Clever is not a learning management system, but I believe you can take those links and drop them in Clever. Or if you're using Google Classroom or Schoology or anything like that, it should just be a simple matter. However you push other things out to kids, if this makes sense, should be the way that you push it out, depending on what learning management platform you're using. So if the person who asked me the question about OpenBook is on the call, feel free to be like, hey, thanks, Dave, that was what I was looking for. Or no, Dave, that wasn't what I asked you for at all. And I will try to redirect really quickly. Hey, I did my
That was me.
Oh, that was you, Karen. Okay.
Yeah, that was me. And yeah, I didn't realize you could just send it through Google Classroom. So that's good to know. I'll try that out. Thanks.
Perfect. Yes, I didn't remember the person, but I remembered the question. I am very proud of myself, because October is by the seat of my pants usually. So all right, I'm going to go ahead and start our very quick Unit 2 overview. Another thing that we are doing a little bit differently this time around is we've tried to link some of the things that we're highlighting in the agenda, just in case you wanted to pull open your own copy of any of these things and kind of scroll through it. So we learn something new every time we present, don't we, Phil? And this was a suggestion that somebody made last time that we're gonna try to honor as we go forth. So Unit 3 is actually what this should say, because we did Unit 2 along with Unit 1 last time. So we are moving right through. As far as our list of content expectations go, this is what we're hitting. And a couple of you asked, hey, we did a lot with Indigenous peoples and we did a lot with European explorers in those early units. what about Africa? Because that's kind of an important part of the American story. And we get into that a lot more in this unit because we wanted to keep a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about contained together so that kids get the whole picture of how, you know, people came from, how people were brought from West Africa to the New World, quote unquote. You know, the ramifications of that and how that works. So all of those standards end up getting addressed in this unit. This looks like a really lengthy list of standards, but it all tells a story and it all goes together very, very nicely. We have some recommendations of some literacy resources here, some different things that you can bring in. Roanoke, The Lost Colony by Jane Yolen. This is not required, and we don't like pull it out in the units, but that is if you're looking for some of those connections back to literacy time. You know, we try to, in the literacy resources pieces here, we try to bring some of those in to you. And then the primary question that we're concerned with in this unit is, to what extent does geography determine destiny? And this is kind of an important question. We use this question in a lot of grade levels for a lot of different purposes. We use it in the ancient world history class to talk about where settlements first begin throughout ancient history. And then we use it all over the rest of the courses as well, just to kind of show you and try to lead kids towards this idea that where you live does have an impact on how you live. Phil likes to talk about how, you know, you sort of build houses and things like that out of the materials that you have nearby. So if you're in the middle of a desert, you're not going to be building all of your houses out of trees. You're probably going to be building it out of mud and brick and stone and things like that. So this idea of to what extent does geography determine destiny is explored in a whole lot of grade levels through a whole lot of ways. And that's one of the things I really like about compelling questions in inquiry-based instruction is when you hit on one like this that can be transferred into so many different classrooms, by the time a kid graduates, they're going to have a really, really, really clear picture, ideally, of the different ways that geography impacts our everyday life. So to what extent does geography determine destiny is our primary question. And then, as always, we have 3 supporting questions. I'm in the wrong unit because I have too many windows open. There we go. So in lesson 1, the supporting question that we're going to be looking at is what conditions and connections determine the fate of a settlement. So that is, again, sending us back to the idea of conditions and connections that we talked about and we established with the where do we put our presentation last time. The second supporting question is, how did triangular trade impact the cultural, economic, and political development of Africa and the colonies? And we're actually going to move your cheese a little bit tonight with the idea of triangular trade, because that is one of Phil's biggest pet peeves, and for good reason, as you will see tonight. However, it is also listed in our standards document as triangular trade, which means M-STEP, there could be a question where the answer is triangular trade. So we do you a square in this unit by teaching you both triangular trade and then what it actually looks like. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about that and unpacking that for you guys tonight. And then the third and final lesson in Unit 3 is all about how and why did colonial regions develop differently. This is a supporting question that is incredibly important for when your 5th graders become 8th graders. The entire story of the 8th grade US history class is really this long stomp from, you know, the establishment of the United States to the Civil War. And there's this whole, you know, one of the M-STEP questions that I hate that pops up a lot, you know, from teachers who do not look over their kids' shoulders while they're taking the M-STEP, because we don't do that, is an 8th grade question like, who invented the cotton gin? And it's a list of 4 names. And of course, Eli Whitney is the correct answer. The problem with that question is I don't care who invented the cotton gin. I'm more interested that kids play around with this idea that the cotton gin transformed the economy of the South, and it also impacted the direction that the economy of the North took. So this question here in 5th grade, under a compelling question of does geography determine destiny, the supporting question of how and why did colonial regions develop differently this is really, really, really important, not just to the story of 5th grade, but to the story that is told throughout the whole year in 8th grade. So as far as Unit 3 goes, it is 3 major lessons. And if you remember the rule of thumb on how long should this unit take me, if I go back to my pacing view, you can see that I've got this one slated at about 6 weeks, which means with 3 different lessons, if you divide 6 by 3, you end up with 2. So you're going to spend about 2 weeks in each of these lessons, give or take, going through. So as far as the overview goes, that is it for me, and I am right on time, which means the first thing that we are going to talk about tonight is actually a thing that Phil and I both love and we hate at the same time. We love the Colonies game because the Colonies game ends up being really, really, really cool when when you attempt to do any part of it. But we hate the Colonies game because we tried to make it as wide-ranging as we possibly could. And in doing so, what we ended up creating was a really good framework that is missing some pieces, and it's missing some of those pieces intentionally. So what he and I decided to do this year, since the Colonies game gets launched in Unit 3 officially, we decided during this rollout, we were going to do a brief, about 20-minute overview of the Colonies game itself. And then we were going to basically let you know that we are looking for feedback as we go. So, as you start to do parts of this, we want to know what's working well and what isn't working well. So for that, I'm going to share a different screen, different window. Actually, I'm just going to share all of desktop 2. And then I'm going to launch my keynote. So this is going to really quickly, oops, let's swap that. Let's swap that again. I have a 3-screen setup here. There we go. And I can't see any of you at this exact moment in time. So, if you're laughing at me, I will never know. And that's very comforting to me. So the Colonies game here. As I start this off, a very important piece I want you to know, and it's the reason why I chose this particular graphic for this slide, even though it is now very pixelated as it is blown up here, but this is a framework. This game is not every single piece that you need to teach the game or to teach to do the game, but it is most of it. And it's a framework on purpose. We wanted rules that were broad on purpose. And again, that's why Whose Line Is It Anyway is up here, because if you've ever watched the show, they always start off with something along the lines of the rules are made up and they don't matter anyway because, and yeah. So the rules to this game are broad, and that's intentional because we have some people that will do every single part of this and their kids will get really into it. And what ends up being called out in the units as like 2 days for a lot of kids ends up being, a week per unit in some cases, because their kids get really, really, really into the game. And so for those teachers, we wanted a framework that allowed them to fill in as many of the holes that we left as possible and totally make their own. But we also, and I will talk a little bit about this a couple of slides from now, we also wanted to make sure that teachers who are running a little bit behind, as a couple of you said that you are, don't have to do the whole thing and can just do bits and pieces. And we will talk about what some of those bits and pieces are in just a minute. The biggest caution that I have for teachers that try to do the Colonies game, and it's really easy for me to say this on the other end of a Zoom, but don't overthink it. If you're reading the instructions, and the instructions change a little bit each unit because we have different scenarios each unit, but if you're reading the instructions and you go, this seems really complicated, why don't they just do this? Do that thing that you're like, oh gosh, it would be much easier if it does this, or if it said this, or if we ran it this way. Because there is no answer key provided, and there is no answer key provided because every student group is going to come up with different things, and it's just going to be sort of up to you to sort of judge based off of the history that we're all learning how this is going to go. Now, some of you have poked at the Colonies game before, and some of you have not. Whichever camp you fall into, don't worry, I'm going to explain all of this, and you will leave tonight going, what the heck did he just say? No, I'm kidding. You will leave tonight hopefully with a little firmer understanding of what you can do with it and you will ultimately do with it what you will. This year, we did go back and add an introduction to this back in Unit 2. So if you have finished Unit 2, you'll notice towards the end of it, we have this optional activity where kids can develop their colonist. And there's a handout for that. I should have put a copy of it on the screen here, but encourage kids to think about, hey, as you create your character for the year, and our characters are immortal, they're going to live, a very long time. But their character, what is the character's goal for leaving the country that they are leaving and coming over to the United States? Have them think about that when they're developing their character. Have them think about what skills they bring to the table. So I'm in Northern Michigan, and in just a few weeks, the entire northern half of the state is going to shut down for deer hunting season. I don't personally hunt, so that's not a skill that I have, but hey, you probably have some hunters in your classroom. That's a skill. Not only is that a skill, that's a skill that's going to be really, really, really helpful in areas of the country where they're not going to be able to rely on agriculture. I do have a green thumb, so I'm hopefully not going to land in New England, but I have a garden every summer, and we grow zucchini and tomatoes, and by the time August hits, I am sick of zucchini and tomatoes. But I can grow things. I know how to keep plants alive. I know how to make plants grow. So that's a skill, and that's a skill that would make me useful in the colonies. So encourage kids to think about some of the things that they're good at that might be skills that would be useful for survival. Playing video games on the Nintendo Switch is also a skill that I have, but that's not really going to help me in a place with no electricity. And obviously no Nintendos have been invented yet. That didn't happen to the 1800s as a card game. Bonus trivia fact for you. I am that nerdy. So, think about what skills they have that might be useful for survival, and then think about what limitations they might have landing in different places. The students that you are going to put together in these groups are going to be together all year. So eventually in each unit, whether you're doing the hardcore version or just the FaxMam version, you're going to say, hey kids, let's break into our groups for colonies, and the same kids are going to be working together for the rest of the school year. So plan accordingly. I put this on there because my best friend in elementary and middle school, was a great human being, and we loved to talk, and teachers knew that and knew that we should never, ever be put together in a group. So thinking about, we're at a point in the year where your little cherubs a little bit better than you did the first couple of weeks. So keeping in mind as you start to develop groups, whether you allow them to choose with some, feedback from you, or whether you choose to make the groups yourself. Just remember, every unit, at least twice, you're going to say, hey, break into your groups for colonies, and the same kids are going to get together. So plan accordingly. This is our base map. And this was another reason I went in to visit Mary Sue the other day, because I had an extra copy and I gave it to her. I also gave a copy over to Mrs. Mulder, since she, has been picking at this game in particular for a couple of years. But this is revised from previous years, and we revised it for some good reasons that I'll let Phil talk about after I go through this presentation. But we wanted to kind of funnel kids into specific areas of the country where they would land. And in some cases, the grid was a little too big. And in other cases, the grid included too much water. So you're kind of locked into place if you land at, if you were to land at H11, even on this map, the way it's presented here. So we revised the gridding on this map, and it now also matches the clickable map of the Eastern United States a little bit more easily. You can see, Karen, you were talking map skills. You can see down here, every grid is an 80 by 80 mile square. And if you would like to get a markable wall map version of this, I do have a couple that I might be able to send out, I will double check my stockpile, Patty. I see you in there, but we also might be able to, I don't know, because I don't have a budget at my ISD, but we might be able to figure out how to get some printed and sent out to you. They're not super expensive when you buy in bulk, and Phil has more experience on this front than I do, so I'll let him talk about ways we can possibly order some of these in just a little bit when I get through this. The big materials that you need to assemble, and this is in the colonies document in the the lesson plan proper, but up to 6 plastic durable folders. We're looking for the durable ones because you know, they're going to go through heck over the course of the year. They're a lot of times going to live with you on your desk until you get to the colonies piece, but I also taught in a classroom where my own desk things, the longer they stayed on it, sometimes did not last. So we're telling you, you know, think about getting some of the more durable folders. School specialty is great for a lot of things, but not necessarily for things to last all year. And then the base map. So that base map that I displayed on the previous page is available. It's available, y'all. It's available in it's available in digital form, in a PDF form that you could print off just on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And you can actually also drop it into Google Slides. And this is actually a tip that I have given teachers before, because you're going to be marking on it throughout the year. So if I go back to this, you know, one of the places that kids might land to set up their colony might be, let's say, square D9, or actually, let's say like square D12 right here, because that's closer. So they're in the square, and what you might do is you might drop this into Google Slides and then just draw a box around it and say Timmy's group. You know, another group might land at, let's say, J9. Okay, so this one's going to be Parker's group. So you can put it in Google Slides and then just add shapes to it that sort of have that disclaimer of whose it is in there if you don't have room in your room for a wall map. If you do have one of the wall maps, you can just take a dry erase or a vis-a-vis marker and you can just write it in here, and when you're all done, it will it'll come off. So the base map is important, and you know, if you aren't able to, if I don't have a stockpile, you know, we might be I can show you a little bit more about how to make it work in Google Slides. I also recommend that you take a binder and print out all the colonies materials as you go and make some notes along the way. Now I say as you go because Phil and I are going to be revising these as the plane is in the air as we collect feedback from you. So print it out. You know, the Unit 3 stuff is definitely ready to go. So print it all out and put it in the binder. And we'll make some changes based off of your feedback this year, but you may also just decide, you know what, this is how I'm going to run it, and you can take those notes in the margin. So we recommend that you print out the colonies materials for your own reference as you go. And we will have scenario cards that are new in each unit, along with some growth and prosperity cards that'll start up in the next unit. I'm not going to get into that part now because that'll come when we get into Unit 4 in December. We are still revising the scenario questions, but you know, basically we are still going to be focusing on how do you survive and what is the survival. So we're finalizing the compelling question, but we know what the supporting questions are going to be. So in Unit 3, every unit a scenario is going to center around what the colonists are facing. So Unit 3, this is when we're starting to set up some colonies. You know, what are the environmental conditions in the place that you land? How might those conditions influence your decisions about living here or moving somewhere else? And what are ways that you could make a living that are feasible in your place? Wide-scale agriculture is not happening in New England. The growing season is too short. It's a rockier soil. That's not going to happen. Whereas you can actually grow stuff the further south you go. So these are the sorts of things that kids are going to have to grapple with in Unit 3. Unit 4, we're going to get into what are the conditions around you. So, you know, if you don't like where you're at, are you going to expand your colony in a different direction, and where are you going to go? And if your population is expanding, it gets a lot easier to say, hey, we've got to move. We can't all live in this 80 by 80 chunk anymore. So Unit 4 is about growth and, you know, what are the conditions like nearby. Unit 5, we're going to have the colonists start to, you know, get some heat from the old world, so to speak. And we're going to talk about what new regulations have been passed by British Parliament or the King, which of those new regulations might have an impact on how you live. So Unit 5 is our unit that's kind of the road to the Revolutionary War. Unit 6, our questions that we're going to consider are what are the main exports or imports from your colony? That's going to be important as we talk about the war itself. What features of your economy might persuade people to be either patriots or loyalists? And in this particular case, you know, are the people who live there, are you going to support the revolution, or are you going to support your home country? And then finally, in the final unit, we're going to talk about, hey, what forms of government are possible for your colony? What are the main features or different forms of government that may spring up there? So these are the scenarios. They're a work in progress, and we will get to those as we go. Every unit, students are going to be presented with a scenario, and that's the scenario that they're going to face. And what I have here are a version, and it's already changed because we have this version and another new version all in the same document right now, and I'll share that in just a minute. But these are the places where kids could conceivably land. So in what you're going to do in Unit 3, every group is going to grab a card, and the card is going to have one of these locations on it. And these are the locations where they are going to land and set up their colony. So there's a new version of this as well as this version, as well as the original version. And you have the choice of which one you want to use, because we don't know which one is the most effective because 2 of them are new. So I will show you this in I will show you the other version in just a second. So each unit, students are presented with a scenario, and in each unit, students are going to have to do a little bit of paperwork. This is where things got confusing, so I'm just going to go over it briefly here, and then when we get to Unit 4, I will just talk about the paperwork part. But the best analogy, the analogy that seemed to fit the best for teachers trying to do this game was, think of it like a check register. You are not going to throw away the original page when you have updated it. You are going to keep adding to it. So you will always have the most recent stuff on top in each group's folder, and you can trace all the way back to the very first one. The reason why on this, and this is what it looks like, the reasons why on this is because if something goes horribly wrong, like you are going through the kids' folders one day and, you know, it's 1773 and your colony has this kid's colony has a population of 10 million. Something went wrong with the math somewhere. So this will allow you to go back and actually track and see, okay, where did the math go wrong? To go back to their Unit 2 supply roster, then their Unit 3 supply roster, then their Unit 4 supply roster. So they're always going to take their old number and add it to this and then multiply it by whatever number is rolled on the dice that pop up. You know, so more on this in Unit 4. Just know that the page that looks like this in the materials, you are going to print a huge stack of them because we're going to go through them all year. Every group is going to include 3 special roles. Someone in the group gets to be the colonial governor. And the colonial governor, you can either say, hey, Mrs. Mulder, I want you to be the colonial governor for your group. Or you can say, hey, Mary Sue, I want you to be the colonial archivist for the group. And these people have important roles because the governor is the only person who can come to you and ask you questions. The colonial archivist is the only person who will have access to that supply roster. So I'm looking at a couple of you, I can't remember who told me that they're teaching math and intercession right now, but find a person who's good at math for the colonial archivist role. And then the colonial explorer. There will be some opportunities for kids' colonies to interact with one another depending on proximity. And your colonial explorer is going to be the only person who is allowed to communicate with, trade with, or contact neighboring colonies. Everyone else in the group is going to be part of the colonial assembly. You'll all work together. So if it's a group of 6 and the group has a question, they will let the governor know what that question is, and the governor is responsible for going to you, the teacher, to ask those questions. If they want to know more about, hey, how much food do we have, or how many people are in our colony? The colonial assembly will ask the archivist, and if you really desperately need some food and you don't have any, you are going to send your colonial explorer out to other groups to try to trade with them. So think about who you put in those 3 roles, and everyone else is part of the assembly. You can rotate these roles each unit if you want to, but make sure that you put responsible people in, particularly the archivist role, because they're going to have to do some heavy math on the fly, and you don't want to find out that all of your all of your grain stores were exhausted and your entire colony dies. We never make an option is never going to be that the colony just dies and vanishes and goes away. That's not going to be any of the options that kids have as part of this. We'll always at the very least say, hey, you're hanging on by the skin of your teeth there, but that's just because they're fifth graders. We will pull the rug out from under them in eighth grade. Where do we land? I'll show you the new landing cards in just a minute, but this is what they look like originally. And then you can see from a couple of slides back, this is one option for what they look like now. And then we have an even prettier option that Phil came up with that is also in the packet that I'll share with you in just a minute. For the landing, which happens in the unit that we are currently in, students are going to select a card at random. That's where their people land. And at the end of each unit, if you, the teacher, believe the settlers have tackled their scenario in a productive way, you will then allow them to choose an expansion card, and that will let them expand their colony in any land-based direction for however many squares they are given. And again, this is where if your people don't save up enough food to get through the winter in New England, we're not going to say, hey, your colony is dead. We're just not going to let them grow. So basically all of this is up to you. That's why I say there's no answer key for this. It's just going to be if your kids go all in on farming and they're in New England, they're in Maine, try to caution them against that because, you're not going to be able to do wide scale, huge farming up in New England because of the growing season. But if they go all in on it, then the penalty isn't going to be their entire colony died. The penalty will be they don't get to expand because part of determining who the winner of this at the end is, how big and successful the colonies are. So after you've done the landing, once you've completed some of the parts of the Giants units that relate back to geography, you're going to give students the scenario, and the scenario will be the questions that we asked before. You're going to let them get into groups and sort of problem solve and try to figure out how are we going to tackle this problem. And then at the end of each unit, students will have learned what the colonists actually did in their zone, and they're going to compare their solutions to what the colonists did. If you skip everything else, at least have kids get into small groups, give them the scenarios at the start of a unit, give them the scenarios that the colonists are going to try to grapple with, have them try to grapple with it, and then circle back to that at the end. So if you want to skip everything else about the game because you're like, this is too confusing, he's been talking about this for 15 minutes and I have no idea what's going on, at least give your kids the problems that the colonists are working on and treat it like a pre and post test. How does this group of kids solve the problem of where they landed? How does this group of kids solve the problem about how are they going to survive the winter, etc.? So if you do nothing else, at least do that part. So the final notes that I want to give before I kind of close this down and we move on to the next piece. It is a framework, and we made it a framework versus a series of if-then statements because we want you to customize it to meet your needs. Don't overthink it. That seems to be the biggest piece that comes up, and it's, again, really easy for me to say don't overthink it, but don't overthink it. The most important part of the game, like I said on the previous slide, are those scenarios. So if you do nothing else, let them grapple with the scenarios. If that supply roster gets too cumbersome, skip it. And again, finally, all year, take notes about what works and what doesn't. We want your feedback. We want to make this a lot better. Phil says this reminds him of the early days designing the Oregon Trail game. I don't disagree with him on that front, but I also know that I am probably never going to get this project to Oregon Trail levels of popularity and people knowing. Gosh, I get dumber as the day goes on. I know what I'm trying to say and I can't summon the words, so I'm just going to stop talking at this point. So I was supposed to do this from 4:50 to 5:20, and it is 5:15, meaning I did that 5 minutes earlier than I thought I was going to. So based off of my overview, does anybody have any quick questions about colonies?
I typed
Elizabeth?
this in the chat.
Go
I
for it.
typed this in the chat. Where do you find this? Is it one place that the whole colony's game is found, or is it an individual little within the units?
I tried to do it in individual pieces in the units, but there is a folder, and I will drop a link to that folder that just has in our Giants folder that we have that you don't have. We have a folder just for the colonies game where I tried to keep everything. So if you wanted to see the whole list of stuff, just know if I put the disclaimer old on it, it's old stuff. I never delete anything anymore because as soon as I do, I end up needing something that was in the thing I deleted. But that folder should get you a list of everything that's in the colonies game. I'm looking at, so Patty, Karen, and Lori, I will look and see how many of those maps I have, if I have any, and if so, I will get them out to you. And Mary Sue, how much time per class period is the game take? If you're doing the whole thing, a round will take probably about a class period per round. So getting kids into groups, having them update their supply roster, having them sort of outline what they're going to do, that would be a class period. And then at the tail end of the unit, when you know what the colonists have done, have them go back in and compare their solution to the colonist solution. That'll take probably about half of a class period. So about a class period and a half if you're doing the whole thing. Otherwise, it's up to you if you're just doing the scenarios. Other questions? I hope you guys have fun with this. It can be fun, as daunting as it looks. And for everything else, there's Dave and Phil. So when we start our next network session, I'll ask how things went, and I will specifically call out the colonies game, and we'll collect feedback, and we'll continue to revise in the hopes that maybe we can get this to Oregon Trails level of God, I cannot think of the word I'm looking for, but fame, Oregon Trail levels of fame. Oregon Trail was a staple of my youth. So when Phil brought up that this reminds him of those early days, I was grinning from ear to ear. However, I also plagiarized portions of this from something I did in my my eighth grade social studies class when I was in school. So, you know, it lives in a lot of different forms, but the idea is it's supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to get kids thinking a little bit about the things that the colonists were going through. And yeah, so have fun with it. All right, it is 5:18, and I have on the agenda that we were going to take a quick break from 5:20 to 5:25. So I'm going to make that go from 5:18 to 5:23. Grab a quick glass of water, take a quick bio break, and we will start at 5:23 with Phil's stuff. All right, this next part is Phil's part, and so I'm going to turn it over to him for the next little chunk here. And Phil, I'm supposed to remind you as well to hit the swap screen button since we couldn't figure that out beforehand. So take it away, Phil.
So we've got this colonies game here, and what you get this time is either a thin strip of paper or a small card that outlines the environment on the different squares. And the environment is going to be broadly defined. It's going to have information about the landform, the soil, the animals that live there, and so on, especially the card version, because it's a little bit more elaborate. And like Dave said, you can either choose the strip version, which is very condensed, and then you make up additional information, or you give them the card version, and it's got a little bit more information. Dave mentioned that I was at the beginning of, I was a reviewer very early on in the development of the Oregon Trail. And we did learn some things about that. And one of the things is to keep focusing on what is your one essential question. And the essential question in this round is, how do I survive in this place where my ship landed? because we all know that not every ship that came over here landed where they wanted to. Plymouth Colony was actually aiming for Georgia and landed in Massachusetts. That's kind of a ways away. So how do you survive once you get there? You're going to have some information, then you've got to bring your background knowledge. Now, in the United States, if you take a look at a group of kids there, they've got a fair amount of background knowledge about the weather. They know what it likes to feel cold and hot and rainy and snowy and so on. They knew a little less about rocks, you know, which ones are hard, which ones are good, a little bit less about water, and they generally know almost nothing about soil or things like tides that turned out to be very important back in the colonial days. That puts me onto a little card that I have, which are things that we keep saying or writing in our standards, even though we know they're not true. And Dave mentioned one of them. You know, we keep talking about triangular trade, but it wasn't anything like a triangle. We talk about the tropical rainforest, but the rainforest is actually on the equator. If you go on the tropic line, it's a desert. We talk about the mid-Atlantic region. We wound up giving you guys a card that talks about all the different things that are called the Mid-Atlantic region, depending on what book you pick up. World history people talk about the Nile River and how the floods made it the soil rich. And that's exactly backwards. You've got a video that talks about the indigenous people living in the desert Southwest. And again, that's just not true. And people keep saying the soil in New England is so thin and rocky. Well, if your notion of thin is 400 feet thick, that's not the problem with the New England soil. So for the next 15 minutes, we're actually going to give you the tools to do the background for that colony's game about the environments in the different parts. And like Dave said, we're not doing it just to solve a 5th grade GLIC. It turns out that the environmental differences, particularly the soil quality, the agricultural potential, and the prevalence of diseases, these things wind up costing us dearly when it comes to the Civil War. They're both part of cause and consequence of the Civil War. So we've got a handful of PowerPoints, and like all the PowerPoints, they're a little bit too long. One of the PowerPoints is about tide mills, because this was a key difference north and south. A tide mill is a mill that gets its power from the ocean tides, and you can use it to grind grain, saw wood, run machines, crush rock, whatever. This is what a tide mill looks like, and we just basically give you a picture. And you'd let the tide in, and then the tide would go over that wheel, and it would turn it, and you would have a mill. We put a map on your clickable map, but we also give you a handout version of it. This is the number of feet of the tide mill, of the tides in different parts of the East Coast. And they range from a high of 10 and 11 and 12 up in Maine to a low of 2 and 3 when you get down to around Washington, D.C. It turns out that you need about 5 feet of tide in order to run a mill, which means New England had a source of power to saw wood, to grind grain, and so on. The Mid-Atlantic area, particularly the Virginia area, did not have that source. Now, where do we find this information? The next 11 slides on this PowerPoint are for the handful of teachers that want to make a science inquiry lesson out of this too. If you're not going to do the science inquiry, then you don't even want to bother looking at these particular ones, and I'm not going to spend any time looking at them. But you can find really interesting information about it. And now you can talk a little bit about how people design a graph and so on. But you get a tide chart for different places. So that brings me back to the clickable map here. The tide range is actually one of the layers on your clickable map. And you want to clue in your students when they get their colony location that they might want to check whether they could grind grain, saw wood, and so on, or whether they have to find another source of power. Dave mentioned a little bit about the fact that tobacco was grown in a particular kind of soil here, but it's in a region that has almost no tidal power. So they had to actually ship their tobacco up to New England in order to get it processed before they would ship it over. And it started to set up your Hamilton versus Jefferson argument about, are we an urban nation or are we a rural nation? And other buttons will turn on other important characteristics. One of them is these two weird words, photosols and ultrasols. And with that, I'm at the end of that PowerPoint. I could set another one up here, start this one from the beginning. Do I have to hit display settings again? Dave?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, you do. Yep.
Okay. This is a 45-frame PowerPoint that is almost entirely for your background, because you're a typical American that you probably don't know very much about soil, unless you're like Dave, where you've got your own garden, and then you've got a view of soil that is fixed in your location. And the whole important point about soils is that good soils are made, they're not found, and they're made by the environment that you have in a particular place. We call it the Goldilocks theory. It's not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, not too dry. So we'll start with a couple short quotations as to why you should even do this. The first one is like a bumper sticker. All human life, schools, stadiums, courtrooms, fine wines, TV shows, everything depends on 2 feet of good soil. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. Because it doesn't rain anywhere and only a few places have really good soil. The second quotation, particularly useful in West Michigan here, Dutch Reformed areas, or in parts of the South, or in where I grew up in Minnesota. Just about every religion has a story about soil. That the sower went out to sow his seed and they fell on the path, the rock, the thorns, and so on. What makes a good soil? And that's what the PowerPoint's about. Soil does not come from the rock. In fact, in most cases, it doesn't matter what the rock is. Soil is the result of the interaction of that rock with the climate, the slope, the animals, the plants, and so on. And if any of those conditions change, you get a different soil. So the right question to ask, and the question that your students would want to ask when they find their colony location, is what are your conditions here? If a place is really cold, rocks don't break apart, and you just don't have any soil. If a place is usually cold, but sometimes goes above freezing, then these processes work very slowly and you wind up with a very rocky soil. If a place is really hot and rainy, those processes work really fast and they turn almost every kind of rock into the very simplest chemical compounds, iron oxides, aluminum, and so on. And as you know, iron oxide is rust. So you're not surprised to find that the soil down there is rust colored and it's not able to hold nutrients. In other words, you can't even fertilize this soil. As a result, the best yield of corn in South Carolina is about 120 bushels per acre. And on my farm in Wisconsin, I would have called that a crop failure. In fact, and it goes on to take, how it can form even something that's almost as hard as a rock, just by being in that environment. If a place is dry, salt will tend to accumulate in the soil. And excess salt is a big problem in a dry soil. In fact, one benefit of the Nile River floods was to wash the salt out of the soil to make the soil less fertile and therefore able to support crops, because with too much salt in the soil, that was toxic. If a place is really rainy, Excess water carries the nutrients out of the soil. That's a process called leaching, and it's the problem of northern Michigan. So if you stop and look at this map of cropland value, where the blue parts of the map are the cropland that's worth more than $2,000 per acre, it's got a very small part of the United States. That a whole lot of the United States is either too hot, too rainy, too cold, or too dry to make a good soil. Now, that's the price of the soil for agriculture. You can have the land cost more if you happen to be next to a city and somebody wants to build a Walmart on it or something. PowerPoint goes on to talk a little bit about the role of floods and how they can make things a little bit different. But the real point is just, it's very hard to make a good soil. You need places with conditions that are just right. And in the original colonies, the conditions were just right for about 5% of the area in eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and a little bit of New York. In fact, if you look at a world map, the United States actually has the biggest block of good soil in the entire world. So we've got an exception at the end about the Black Belt of Alabama. That's going to become important a little bit later on. I'm just going to point out that this is an environment where the climate would make a bad soil, but a particular rock or a flood can make a good soil within that bad soil. And that turns out to be where the plantation areas were. Like I say, you can look at the PowerPoint on your own and find out more about it if you want. But the fact of the matter is, there just isn't very much good soil. And the eastern part of the United States is by and large too rainy, and it's too cold up north, and it's too hot down south. And the result is there's just not very much good soil anywhere on the East Coast. So that's two. And I'm trying to see where I am on my time here.
You are just fine.
The third one is one that they might actually have had. Now I'm trying to figure out why I'm not even seeing how to start the slideshow. Maybe if I punch the button, it'll start. There we go. Display settings one more time. There is a chance that they will have looked at this one in 4th grade. It is also available in 8th grade. The big idea is, what is a region? And how can we use that knowledge to talk about North America? So a region is a group of places that are like each other and close to each other. So you can draw a line around them and say, this is what, this is the hardwood region, or this is the grassland region, or this is the desert region. Why do we make regional maps like that? Is because it's easier to remember the shape of the region. If your kids have not done this, and we actually make region maps in 3rd grade, Giants, about nut trees and pine trees in Michigan, about Ojibwe settlements and things like that. Let's make a regional map of North America. Now, North America is a great big continent. It's bigger north-south than any other continent, which means it's got a huge range of different environments in it. And the idea is how to figure out how to make this easy to remember. And the answer is, we can draw 4 lines on this map, and we basically have told what the place is like. Line number 1 starts at the tip of Alaska and goes to the east coast of Mexico. In other words, it's very easy to remember, and this basically divides the United States into the old rocks and the young rocks. The young rocks are in a mountainous region because of the processes that made the young rocks. The old rocks are basically a plains region. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule. The PowerPoint talks about the exceptions. I'm not going to. You don't need to remember them all. That's what maps are for. What you should remember is that there's a huge line that separates the place of the high mountains and the young rocks from the lowland east. And you should be able to draw it on a blank map whenever you see it. The second line has been described as the sagging hammock. And your butt is sitting right down there about in Cadillac, Michigan, I think. That's the line that separates where it can freeze in June from where it probably can't freeze in June. And it stops when you reach the west, because in the west, the rules are completely different. The line separates the east into the northern region that's too cold for farms and a warmer region where people could grow food if they've got enough water and a good enough soil and all the other stuff you might need. The third line runs due north from the tip of Texas, and it separates the rainy east where trees can grow from the mid plains where there's not quite enough rain for trees, and so the natural vegetation was grasses. Here again, the western region is a little bit more complicated because the western region has got a lot of high mountains. The mountain tops tend to be colder and rainier and have trees on them, and the mountain bottoms tend to be warmer, drier, and be deserts or grasslands. And notice how the last two lines that I've just drawn basically outline the part of North America that has got a lot of rural settlement in it. The satellite image of the nighttime of the lights. There's a few urban areas. The PowerPoint explains that. The last line runs right through the middle of the farming region, just basically due east-west over there. This is where the frost-free season is 7 months long, and that is important for two reasons. One is cotton and one is rice. That those two crops need at least 7 months of a growing season or they can't grow. Oh, and also north of the line, people pay more for heating than air conditioning. South, air conditioning is more expensive. And it goes on to explain why this was important in history, because slavery could only be profitable where you had a really high value crop like cotton. So that's it. It's 4 lines, divides North America into a western mountain region, a northern cold region, a Great Plains grass, a southern cotton pine, and a Great Lakes farm region, and a Central American hot and hilly region down here. Now, you might even want to turn this PowerPoint around and show them pictures. The western mountain region looks like that, the northern cold region, the Great Plains grass. In other words, you could lead with the pictures if you wanted to. Or you could show a map like this. When you were asking about map skills, this is just what Dave meant, like we build the map skills in all the way along. So can you remember where to draw the lines? And we can draw them on a satellite image. Does this work? And this is a 6th grade student that did not know that a pop quiz was coming 2 weeks after they showed the PowerPoint. And the 6th grade, this was the average student in that class, according to the teacher. And there's another one. In other words, if you run through the PowerPoint or have them run through it, they will get this idea. Now, a geographic region isn't a real thing out there. It's what we get when we draw lines to put similar places into groups. So there are people that want to talk about something called the Desert Southwest. And I mentioned right at the beginning, that's where my little baloney meter kind of goes up into the purple zone a little bit, like these noble Indians that were surviving in the Desert Southwest. If you think that makes it easier to remember, fine. But I suggest it is easier and more accurate to remember that in the West, deserts are in all of the lowlands and forests are in all of the highlands. Even when you go all the way, well, I don't even want to do that. I'm going to stop. There's the Pueblos at Mesa Verde. And they didn't live in the desert Southwest. They lived in a forest. And in fact, they were protected from enemies by the fact that there was a desert around their forest. But on the mountain where they lived, it was a forest. And in fact, the temperature in July and the temperature in January and the total amount of rainfall and the total amount of snowfall in the Mesa Verde Indian settlement is exactly the same as Zeeland, Michigan, right outside of Holland. To say that they didn't live in the desert Southwest is a simplification that hides an important part of the truth. So there's the numbers that you've got. The temperature through the years, and there's the amount of rain and snow, and you can't tell me which of those stripes is Zeeland and which of those stripes is Mesa Verde, because the climate of those two places is absolutely identical. Meanwhile, we talk about the Pacific Northwest as being rainy, and this is a picture of something called Dry Falls in the middle of the Pacific Northwest. It's a desert. So all regional maps are generalizations. And sometimes we use words where we keep saying it even though we know it's not true. But a simple line can help us organize. Dave, do I got about 2 more minutes yet?
Take it away, Phil.
Go for it. So here are the daytime and the satellite images again. Can you see the regions? Can you draw that line there? And the sagging hammock? And the grassland versus forest line? And the cotton versus corn line? And you put the same ones over here. Now, a mental map like this can help you organize a whole lot of environmental information that you don't need to memorize that. I'm going to give you 2 very simple examples, and these are not for 5th grade. These are for adults. There's a map of German immigrants in 1898. And the sagging hammock, and the wet, dry forest and grassland line, and the corn and cotton line. There's a map of people who did not have health insurance in 2000. Because what Dave says is the big compelling question of this unit is geography destiny? And in some ways, in the United States, geography is destiny in terms of where your ancestors came from, what crops you grow now, what your economy is like, and even when you are likely to have health insurance. Now, if you want to go and look at a few more things like that, here's a map of what people call, because the Coke and Pepsi line shows up here. Here's a map of religion in the United States, a map of high school graduation rates, a map of, you're going to be teaching your kids with this unit something that they can use for the rest of their life to help them interpret maps of, well, I don't know, what are the swing states in the next election? We make regional maps to put places together. On a blank map of North America, 4 lines can organize a lot of information. So what I tried to do with those 3 PowerPoints was to say, when your kids get dropped on the square, and their job is to find out, what do we do in this place in order to survive? If you want them to go and look at the clickable map to get more information and make an inquiry activity out of it, go for it. They're going to want to go play around to find out how they survive. So that's my part. Dave, you want me to stop share?
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I will throw Mary Sue under the bus here. Not under the bus, but that's a bad analogy. But I mentioned before, her school is basically right across the street from my office. So I've sort of invited myself into her room a few times this year, and I will continue to invite myself in. But one of the things that she was showing me were some maps, and that the kids had gone back and drawn those boundaries on, which I thought was really cool. And it's really interesting too when you start drawing those lines on maps of things like Phil was telling you, the Coke and Pepsi line is real, but how about those German immigrants and their health insurance, right? Because the maps, where they settled and where more people have health insurance, it's all really, really cool. I got into an argument with another social studies consultant who is no longer in the field anymore, but she was criticizing some work that I'd put together because she said I wasn't using the real true Midwest region. She's like, well, everyone knows that the Midwest includes this state or that thing. And I didn't know Phil at the time, but I wish I had, because I would have been like, oh yeah, I'm going to blow your mind right now with this sagging hammock thing, but a region, and that's a point I try to champion now. A region is a thing because we make it a thing. And this is a great activity for sort of demonstrating that on a really simple level for kids. So that's why it's included in as many grade levels as it's included. But the good news is we know that social studies isn't consistently taught K-5. So even though this appears in 4th grade and this appears in, I believe, some of the later grades as well, you still get to do it in 5th grade, and the likelihood of all of your kids having been through it before is pretty slim. Because it's elementary social studies is spotty. We know this. This isn't a surprise to any of you. Where it really truly begins almost everywhere that I work is 5th grade. Some grades it's earlier. A couple of places it's later, believe it or not. But for the most part, 5th grade is pretty consistent. So what I'm going to go through now is just a little bit on some of the remaining activities in here. And I'm not going to actually go into great depth on the Wealth of Africa activities, but I wanted to share with you very quickly that to get around copyright permissions, because it's not always super easy for us to secure the permissions that we want. Sometimes we link out to a lot of things. And the things that we link out to sometimes disappear. And what we had here in the unit, I think I'm in the wrong spot. Goodness, I had all that time to pull up exactly where I needed to be, and I didn't do it. Oh, Wealth of Africa, there we go. So I found some really great resources on Ghana, Mali, and Songhai from the British Museum. And I linked directly to those PDFs because I didn't want to assume ownership of something that wasn't ours. And it was great stuff. And it disappeared a couple of years ago. And I had to go through and I had to find something to replace it. And what they had was perfect. And I even contacted people there and they're like, nope, we purged all those files off the server. So they ended up with a new exhibit called Wealth of Africa. And so we've woven some of this stuff in to the unit to replace the stuff that used to be here that disappeared. So if you've used these units in the past, you're going to see that these are new, even though they're covering some of the same things. And this time I did save it to my own Google Drive, even though we try not to do that, because I do not want to have to go around hunting for all of this stuff again. So please don't turn me into the copyright police, even though I'm sure that if I were to reach out, they would probably say yes. In the event that they might say no, I'm just gonna edit this part out of the video later. No. We've had some stuff pop up on copyrights via YouTube, and I've always been able to work through those. So what we have here is first a teacher's note document that kind of walks you through the sorts of things that you're going to see, and it has some of the handouts there. And then the second part of it is actually the presentation, and it's a presentation in PDF format. Again, just like OpenBook and other things, you can share this directly with kids if you want. Talks about how did the Kingdom of Mali become so wealthy, and again, it kind of walks through the timeline piece. I like this because it's sort of the stacked timeline that Phil advocates for, but they stacked it in the wrong direction. Instead of having a line across the page, it's going up and down. If you think of it like a pile of papers on your desk, the best way, not the best way, but a way that Phil has advocated for in the past is think of a timeline like a stack of papers on your desk. The most recent ones are on top. So it's got a vertical timeline, but it's doing it backwards. Yeah, 13th century did not come before the 17th, but You know, all the sources are included in here, and I like this one. The one perk of this over what used to be here is that this reading is pretty short and simple for a fifth grader, whereas some of the stuff that was up there before was not. So the sources are in here. You've got pictures. You can display this on the board. You can pass it out to kids. So I bring this up because this is brand new, and I know some of you, like Patty, have taught these units for a few years, and this was a replacement. Actually, I think it was Patty who let me know initially that this stuff went down a year or two ago, and I had to start to find the stuff to replace it with. So this is what we replaced it with, and I like it, but I miss what used to be here as well. I really wish I'd. We're doing the same thing with videos too. I'm getting to a point where when there's a YouTube video that Open Book or some of the other projects that I work with, you know, goes down, when I find that replacement, I am half tempted now to just download that video so that I can put it up somewhere unlisted, because really good stuff exists on the internet, but it always disappears eventually. So that's my new lesson learned that I'm sharing with you. And I hope you find our replacement stuff valuable. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this idea of the triangular trade. So to do that, I'm actually going to bring up a different window on my computer here. Phil has the most glorious PowerPoint that sometime when there's extra time we'll run you through. And his entire PowerPoint debunks the Dale Cone of learning. And it is one of my favorite things of his. I made him give me a copy of it. And I always threaten to go through it, but you know, you take that Dale Cone of learning that you've heard so much about in the past, like I learned 90% of this or 10% of this or, you know, 15% of that. And it was not actually a real thing, but over time it's become a real thing. So much so that at Wexford, we used to have this big, huge wall-sized poster of it in our professional development rooms. And we centered our philosophy of the general education department around it for a period of time. And it wasn't until Phil finally gave me that PowerPoint and I showed it to my boss that I debunked it and she took those things down. But so I want to do something very similar here with the triangular trade. So we have the standard that talks about the triangular trade. And, you know, this is a very common image, right, of, you know, what it looks like, but it is grossly oversimplified. You know, so this one really just makes it look like, hey, you know, if you keep drawing this line, it looks like northern Florida is shipping up to, you know, southern United Kingdom. And then, you know, we start off here in the middle of the ocean and just sort of go down here to the other part of the middle of the ocean and something happens. And then, hey, this line, we then go from this part of the middle of the ocean over to here. And, you know, we're saying that stuff is going here and stuff is coming from there and going there, but it's grossly oversimplified. But we have a standard that calls it this, and we have an M-step that will assess on this. So we have to teach kids that, yeah, it does sort of look like a triangle, but, you know, if you were to Google triangular trade right now, which I did while Phil was talking to develop this on the fly, you will come up with thousands of different images. You know, we've got this one, which actually is a little more accurate than a lot of the ones that are in this presentation, but is still, you know, grossly oversimplifying things. Then you've got this one, which sort of, if you're a Star Trek fan, sort of looks like the communicator badge logo here. See a couple of you nodding and smiling there. Thank you. You have this one, which isn't a triangle at all. And, you know, sort of eliminate South America fully from it. This one actually came out of, I believe, a textbook. So that's another good reason to not always believe everything that comes out of your textbook. This one's a little blurry and at least shows you some exit ramps that goes there. And yeah, I guess you could sort of overlay a triangle on top of it. But what I like about this one is we're at least getting the curvature correctly, which, you know, takes it away from being a triangle. Now, this one also is showing you that there's more than what's just happening here going on. But again, you know, it's a little more complex than just a triangle. This one actually looks more like a rhombus to me. And I give myself a gold star anytime I can work the word rhombus into a casual conversation. But you know, I've got the one line here, I've got the line here, I've got the line here, although it sort of curves a little bit. So some of you were like, yeah, you're not the math consultant, and it shows, Dave. This one's nice because it's got a pretty picture of a ship on it, but again, it's not really. We're apparently sailing ships through Italy, down through the Sahara Desert, and over here, and you know, up again here. So that's a problem with this map. Thank you, study.com. This one's just a hot mess. It is at least, showcasing that there's a lot going on here, but there's a lot going on here. Then there's this one, which, is super cutesy, and you could apparently click on this to access this in a Google Slide version, but I'm not sure why we would want to. And then this one, there's all sorts of I don't even know where this is. Is that cheese? Is it Africa? I don't know. I can't tell by looking at this particular map. So, you can have some fun with kids with some of these maps that you can just, type in triangular trade in a Google search and, see what pops up like I did. And you can build one of these in about 30 seconds by just, scrolling through and grabbing some of these. So what do we want kids to learn when it comes to the triangular trade? Several things. This is a piece that you and only you are going to have access to. If you click on Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade in tonight's agenda, it's going to take you into some scans from this book. This book right here is called The Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Phil told me I had to own a version of this, and he was so adamant that he actually got on Amazon, ordered me a copy, and sent it to me. And I'm super glad that he did, because it's helped on a variety of fronts. But this is a huge book that is filled with maps that do a much better job of showing what's happening page by page by page by page than any one map can really do justice to. It's only about $20 on Amazon. So, add it to your wish lists and, pick up a copy if you are ever so inclined and able to. But I have put in the agenda tonight a scan of some of my favorite pages that I want you to feel free to utilize with your kiddos this year to help them realize that it's more than just a triangle. There's a lot going on here. So, this is the slaves that are coming from Africa by nationality. So this one over here, you can see the Portuguese are sending them over to Brazil, and you've got the British that are moving up through the Caribbean, and the French moving up through the Caribbean, and the Dutch are moving up to my mental map of the world is not telling me correctly in my head where it's going, but Northern South America. And you can see that this is from 1642 to 1807. And it is not a triangle. And it's not all coming just out of here. It's coming from here. You can also see that about 100 years later, 1808 to 1867, there's a lot fewer of them coming. And none of them are coming up to only a few of them are coming up to the United States based off of this particular map. And that tapers off after we outlaw the importation of slaves in the United States. But there are still ways to get them there. This one is 1501 through 1867. So you can see again where we're bringing people in from, including some from, this is not a very efficient route coming over from Southeast Africa down below Africa and up through and coming in here. But again, this is another great map to share with kids to show that it's not as grossly simple as just seeing triangular trade. There's more to it. Here's the slave trade in terms of the Portuguese and Brazilians from 1526 to 1867. The size of the lines matter, and I had to have Phil explain this to me because I didn't necessarily get it myself, but the thicker the line, the more slaves are coming from that particular region. The skinnier the line, the fewer slaves are coming or going to that particular region. So again, share some of these maps with kids as well. And we spend a lot of time talking about the British and the French in particular. So here is the British transatlantic slave trade from 1563 through 1810. Same deal with the French transatlantic slave trade from 1643 to 1831. Again, you can see where they're coming from, where they're going to, the number of captives, all of that. So I tried to scan some of these maps for you so that you can use them as a sort of value added. Hey, I got to attend the, I signed up for the Giant Sessions. So I get this thing that people who didn't sign up for the Giant Sessions don't get. Because for copyright purposes, I can't give you this. I can't give this to you in the lessons. So, make sure you check out agendas for little hidden gems like this going through. But these maps are really, really cool and should help solidify for your kids that, yes, we call it the cheese triangle, or in this case, the triangular trade. We call it the triangular trade, but it is not as simple as our textbooks and everyone else would like us to think it is. So, you know, showcase this because this will be an MSTEP question, but then teach them the right, teach them the right thing. And if you have an opportunity to pick up the Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade on Amazon, highly recommend it. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is 400 beautiful full color pages of all of these maps and lots of great information. Your kids are going to ask you, well, where did these slaves go? And where did they, and you're going to be able to, as you pull out the maps, you're going to be able to tell them because it's got the, it always has the added bonus of explaining what's happening in the map alongside that. So keep in mind, I can't share this with you, but always look at agendas of our meetings for hidden gems that you might be able to use. Yes, I saw the wink. Thank you. So yes, there we go. I've got something in my eye right now as I finish explaining this to you. Some of you are like, I don't get what he's saying. If he has something in his eye, was and he turned his camera off and just get it out of there. I'm telling you, click on the link in the agenda. There we go. And then to finish things off here before I get into the assessment portion of things, we in fifth grade, starting in third grade, sorry, have changed terminology away from Native Americans into Indigenous peoples. And the reason for that is because in 1996, when Michigan adopted the standards and benchmarks, Dave Johnson was a junior in high school, just living his best life. We had a set of standards that referred to the people who lived here before everyone came over as the American Indians. And then in our 2007 revision to the content expectations, we called them Native Americans. And so recognizing in 2013, when we started updating standards, that, hey, every time we update the standards, we have to call the people who lived here before something different. What should we call them this time? And someone had the bright idea to say, there are 12 tribes in Michigan alone. Why don't we ask them what they would like to be called, how they would like to be represented in our standards? And so we did. And their recommendation was Indigenous peoples. And they recognized that people already indicates plural, but they wanted peoples because, as we pointed out, there are 12 tribes in Michigan alone. So this is a terminology shift, and I'm not going to make you guys watch the video here. Partially because we're running short on time and partially because I've lost a lot of weight since this video. And I just don't need to see all the chins that I used to have. So I'm not going to share it with you here, but it's a really good video, again, for teacher background knowledge that kind of talks a little bit about why we made the change. And I'm interviewing my friend Eric Hemingway, who works for the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians up in, he's housed out of Harbor Springs. And Eric has been he is Indigenous, and he has been just incredible to work with over the years. I'm super lucky that he's in my zone and that he's willing to work with and partner with me on so many things because he is just fantastic. And so he explains that terminology shift. So if you're having trouble with the shift, just watch the video and his reasoning is good. I don't think you will run into any crazy parents who are like, what are you doing? Calling them this. I don't think you'll run into any of those folks. And if you do, I have literally used this video at professional development to stop some of those people. I can't even remember where, but pre-pandemic, I was rolling out the new standards, and a woman raised her hand after I said, and one of the terminology shifts is we now say Indigenous peoples instead of Native Americans. And this woman, I think her name was Karen, got something in my eye again, but raised her hand and said, I don't care what you're calling them in these standards. They are Native Americans, and that is what I am going to call them. And I just let the comment go. And I decided that at lunch, I would ask my audience, hey, if we have a working lunch and I show you this video, we can get out half an hour early. What do you guys think? And if you've ever been in professional development for a whole day and your presenter gives you that deal, what do you say? You say, oh, heck yeah. And in this particular case, I was going to let him go early anyway. And so I shared this video and I showed this video, and it was great because I just watched the woman, because it's Eric's words. It's Eric talking about the reasons why and the power behind the words and why it needs to be this and not that. And I just sort of watched this woman, who again, I think her name is Karen, just slide further and further and further down in her chair, like, oh boy, oh boy. And like later on, some of the other folks from her school were like, yeah, that was handled really, really well. We don't like her either. And I was like, it's not that I don't like her. I just needed to make sure that she understood that she may have Indigenous students in her classroom, and this is important, and this is the reason why. So if anyone ever challenges you on the terminology shift as you're making it in your own classroom, go back to this video. You can even just show them the first 2 minutes of it. It's about 15 minutes in length, and it will explain why. And I have had 5th grade teachers that have even shown the video to their students so that they understand too. I'm going to ask, I do not know the answer, but I'm going to ask Patty. Patty, have you shown the video to your students, or have you just done you said yes. So what have their reactions been? I'm curious.
You know, I did it years ago, but definitely they were on the edge of their seats thinking it just really gave them something to think about. And then we had good discussion afterwards. And I didn't show them the video again this year, but we just had the thing about Native Americans being, what is the little thing at the beginning of my open book, Dave? I'm having a blank. We just read it today. Something about the standards say Indigenous people, but we're going to call them Native Americans or something, or the standards say Native Americans. There's a little blurb in the front part of chapter 2 of my open book. So we had a discussion about that too. I liked the video. I may have been one of the people in that audience when you first did it. I like it. I thought it was very informational.
And Eric teaches too. So he, it's accessible for accessible for a 5th grade audience, and it's not inappropriate at all. And he does a really good job of really good job of explaining it.
Yeah, I was right in the beginning of that chapter. I thought, yeah, right there. Yeah.
Yes. So our original editor of the 5th grade book, in the first version of the 5th grade book, we used American Indians as well because it mimicked what was in our standards document. And then after our standards were revised, we went through and we changed it. And that's where we added this disclaimer that, the Museum of the American Indian is out in Washington, D.C., and they're using this name. And we used to use this name, but now we're using Indigenous peoples because of the standards. So perfect. All right, the last thing I wanted to kind of share with you and showcase before we get into the assessment conversation to kind of end the evening is this colonial experiences with self-government piece. And so towards the end of this unit, we have colonists that are coming over. Why is this not popping out? Thank you. I feel like every time I log into Google Docs, there's something new that I don't understand anymore. And I feel like my mother, which is scary for those of you who have ever met my mother. But so what we've done is we've created this guide filled with all the different colonial experiments with self-government. And we don't necessarily expect kids to read all of this in one class period because there's a lot. We've got the Mayflower Compact, we've got House of Burgesses, we've got Quakers in Pennsylvania, but we do over the course of time want them to read all of these things because these things are just some of the foundational pieces that we're going to circle back to at the end of the units, at the end of the year, when the colonists win the Revolutionary War and start to establish their own government. So one of the things is I'm looking at this even without the regular instructions that I have in here. Mary Sue, when I was in her room, was showing me the journals that she has the kids keeping track of stuff in. This would be a great thing to cut out and paste into a journal, or they can do it digitally as well and just say, hey, today we're going to read this chunk on the House of Burgesses. Here's what I want you to do, and the instructions are down here. As you're reading through, anytime you see something that describes how the House of Burgesses was run, I want you to highlight it or circle it, or I want you to underline it. And then after they've read and after they've underlined those things, have a discussion with the whole class. Do you feel like this was an effective way to govern? Why or why not? Be done with that for the day. The next day, hey, we're going to take a look at the Mayflower Compact. Same thing. Highlight the text above that, kind of hits the major ideas of it. Do you feel like this was an effective form of government? Why or why not? Have the conversation, be done with it, move on, and then we get to the Quakers in Pennsylvania. Same deal. Highlight the text above that describes the major ideas. Do you feel like this was an effective form of government? Why or why not? We're not putting in every colonial experience with self-government here. We're just highlighting a few. But this document and these ideas are good. We're going to circle back to multiple times throughout the units. So definitely this is one of the pieces not to skip in this unit because this is super, super important to the overall story, if that makes sense. So as you're looking through the units and you're looking at things and you're like, gosh, how do I make it through all of this? Those are one of the things that you can, that you should not skip. Whereas some of these extra things, so I love The Middle Passage by Tom Feelings, and that is one of those literature connections that we've talked about before. We give you a link to the Michigan e-library where you can check it out if you don't have a copy of it available to you, and they will help you get it because, right now 50 Michigan e-libraries have this. But we also have this link to, so if you can't wait for that, or if you don't want to use if you don't want to use multiple class periods to go through it, we also have linked to a YouTube version of someone reading The Middle Passage that has all of the, major points of this. And so this can be done in 6 minutes. So instead of reading the book out loud with the whole class, if you don't have time, do the YouTube version of it. This is one that I'm going to make a note to make sure I download tonight or tomorrow, because a lot of times the people reading the books ones tend to disappear. We learned that during COVID. What was there one day was gone the next. In 6th grade, I think Phil had that problem with a couple of the things that they had linked to. So this is a link that I check quite frequently to make sure it's still up. So if you don't have time to check it out, or you don't own a copy, at least take a minute to walk kids through this, because it's very chilling for them to see some of the illustrations and some of the pictures that were in here. And to a lot of kids, this is the first time in social studies in Michigan that they're going to get exposed to this. And so it's the start of that slavery story that is such a very, very, very important part of the 8th grade course in particular. So know that this is in here, and that's a way that you can shorten Unit 3 if you need to shorten Unit 3. As far as the final things here, the Eric Hemingway video lives towards the end of this chapter. And here's where your early colonial experiences with self-government activity is. And that brings us into the assessment part. So while I'm pulling the assessment piece up, I'm wondering, what questions might you have about Unit 3 overall?
Hey, Dave, didn't
Yes.
Phil, either you or Phil somewhere along gave us the map of the actual trade? Was that one of you guys? I don't know. And it comes back and forth, up and down, across, like there's just all different angles about what gets to one place or the other. Or is that not from you guys?
It's in here somewhere. I know what you're talking about, because I took some limited graphic design skills from about 8 years ago and built one. I can probably do better now.
The actual shape of trade, right? Shape of trade.
Yes. Where'd it go? Where'd you see it?
Oh, no, I was just saying I can't see it. It's too small. I can't see that.
Okay. I thought you were saying
If you
no,
hit
no.
Control F, you could type in shape of trade.
Do you still use that, was my point.
Yes.
That triangular trade, is that still an okay thing to use with kids, or would you prefer not? Yeah.
This one.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. It's still not perfect, but again, this is a more simplified version where they can see the triangle, but they can also, whoa, I don't know what just happened there. They can see the triangle, and they can see that it's not just one thing going there. So Phil, I built this one. Is this one still okay to use with the disclaimer? You're muted, but I know that smile. He's going to say no. I've seen that smile 100 times over the years. He's not saying anything now, which is even
I would be
worse.
tempted. I would be tempted to go back to the clickable map and say, okay, they're raising indigo here. Where is it going to go? Because a lot of the pine trees that they were harvesting out of New England actually went south to the Caribbean islands because it was a straighter and a little bit more durable wood. And the question is just, where does a particular product likely to go? Wool came from, that's a raw material, but it came from England and Scotland because they had a tremendous surplus of it at the time. And they were sending it over here because people were finding out it was a cold, the woolen blankets that they were selling in the trading networks. And it's, in the last analysis, it's not important that the student know the facts about what was being sold at the time. What's important is for them to realize that every place has to think of something that they can sell to the rest of the world in order to get the things that they can't do themselves. And, you can make up examples on the fly, even using your local home community as your example.
So would
So
you
I
not
think-
use that map anymore, or is it still okay just to give them that?
Yeah.
Am I giving them wrong information?
Yeah, like I say, I would just downplay them trying to remember the exact details of that map. I think that's one of the things that the colonies game, the way Dave was thinking of it, does a nice job of. It's to say, we weren't 3 regions in North America. We were an indigo region, and a rice region, and a tobacco region, and a white pine region. And for a while, New England was selling ice to Great Britain because they would put the ice on the ships in order to ship meat to India. And so Walden Pond, Henry David Thoreau and all that, Walden Pond had a major business selling ice to British ships in order to preserve meat. And there's just a whole armload of that kind of local environmental condition that created a local economy that could be used in a particular way. And that's the message that they need as a citizen today. So they don't really need to remember, what the colonial trade was, except insofar as you need it for the UMSTEP.
And that, I think, to kind of bring that part home, I think that is the key. This is going to be this map right here, the one that my mouse is hovering over right now, the one with the pure triangle, is probably what they're going to see on the UMSTEP. And somebody asked about that in the chat. This map that I developed, I think for Open Book initially, but then also for Giants, is a good segue into the fact that it's not this simple. And you can point out that's the limitation of both of these maps. And then you guys can also share with them some of the pieces from the Atlas of the Atlantic Slave Trade. And then you've done your due diligence. You've taught them the real thing, and you've taught them the thing that will pop up on the assessment, if that makes sense. And you can do it kind of through a combination of the 3. A map like this one that they're going to see on the UMSTEP, a map like the one that I designed for, a little bit better representation. And then I've got too many tabs open. I'm going crazy. And then the Atlas of the Slave Trade one to sort of solidify the point that it's not that simple. Does that make sense? Gotcha. Okay. The assessment for this one is set up very similar to the assessment from the previous 2 units. It is a grand total, in this case, of 15 questions, where our drag and drops are. So like this slide is questions 1 through 6. Each one of the markers that they will drag to the different parts of the different parts of the country. They are all, question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we've got a chart up here that again sort of reviews the different major characteristics of each of the Regions, again, keeping in mind what Phil just said there, we don't have an indigo region listed on here. We're again trying to use terminology and language that will appear on the M-Step, and our lessons do a nice job of walking both of those paths. This one requires a video, and it's a video that I made, so it's not going to go anywhere, but they also may not necessarily need the video to answer the question, because in this particular case, they may have some of that background information from Jamestown. We also have a piece, and this is where it gets into those different forms of colonial self-government that we talked about towards the end of the unit. We've got a question that really focuses in on Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams and Rhode Island and everything that took place there with the Quakers. And then, you know, this one sort of culminates for the whole unit. If you go back to our compelling question of, you know, does geography equate to destiny? The final question is asking kids to think like their colonist that they've created for the colonies game and say, you know what, you're coming from Europe to settle in America. Which region would be the best for you and why? And this is the question that's really going to get their opinion out, but it's an opinion that's going to be based in facts. So, you know, I think of a couple of kids that I had throughout the years that, you know, they love hunting and fishing so much. These are kids that are definitely going to head to New England or to that region of the country. So this allows them to really show you what they've learned about the different regions of the United States by deciding where they want to live and then providing you some evidence on why. So the assessment is again available in the assessment folder. You have access to the assessment folder as a participant because it is linked on every agenda. And keep in mind that our agenda document is a running agenda document. So the newest stuff will always be on top. So when you circle back to this in December, when we come back together, session 2 is going to be on the next page, and we're going to have a session 3 agenda that will be linked like this, but it will always have the assessment folder down at the bottom because the last few minutes of each of these, we're always going to go over the assessments proper. It is 6:29. We changed the format this year, or you mentioned it last time, so that we are going content-wise from 4:30 to 6:30, and then we're going to let you guys go, aside from those of you who want to stay on because you have an additional question or anything like that that you would like to answer. Phil and I will hold office hours for at least a few minutes after this, all the way up to 7:30 if everyone stays to ask questions through that time. But we appreciate your time and attention and energy tonight. I know it's never fun teaching all day and then coming in to do a Zoom, but at least it's a 2-hour Zoom now instead of a 3-hour Zoom. And I'm going to stop the recording, which will hopefully be up tomorrow, but probably won't be up until closer to Friday because of my schedule. And